A rookie white cop interrupts a court testimony by a black woman, calling her a liar in open court. What he doesn't know is that she has a secret audio recording, one that could expose years of corruption, lies, and institutional racism hidden deep within the department. When that recording plays, the entire courtroom falls silent. The walls of justice are about to collapse. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The fluorescent courtroom lights hummed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the polished wood and worn leather chairs. Each creak of the old building echoed louder than expected, but nothing drowned out the tension in the air. It was a silence you could feel, sharp, thick, and stifling, as if everyone in the room held their breath in collective anticipation. The judge, a pale, gray-haired man named Harold Grissom, adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the witness stand. The atmosphere shifted the moment her voice began to tremble. Jamira Holton sat poised but weary, her posture erect but fragile, like a glass sculpture trying not to shatter under the weight of eyes trained to doubt her. 29 years old, black, and fiercely intelligent, she wore her trauma as plainly as her simple blouse and slacks, understated but heavy with meaning. Her eyes held more history than her years should have allowed. She wasn't just recounting an event, she was excavating pain that had been deliberately buried by the very system surrounding her. Across from her, seated with the other officers, was Nathan Blake, the youngest cop in the precinct and the newest member of the force involved in her case. His knuckles turned white as he clenched his fists under the table. His eyes flicked back and forth between Jamira and the prosecutor, then toward the judge, as if looking for an invisible lifeline. His clean-shaven jaw twitched, and a vein pulsed at his temple. There was something in her tone that pierced him, a quiet authority that contradicted every assumption he'd made about her the night she was arrested. Jamira's voice didn't shake from fear. It trembled from exhaustion, from restraint. She was recounting the night she'd been pulled over after leaving her community center job, how she was handcuffed in front of her niece, accused of obstructing justice without any tangible reason, how her phone was knocked out of her hand, and her words were twisted into defiance. She explained how they'd made her sit in the back of the patrol car for nearly an hour, even though she had committed no crime, and how the officers refused to let her speak to a lawyer. Nathan's leg began to bounce. The courtroom stenographer kept typing, her face unreadable. But something in the back of the room shifted. A subtle discomfort passed through the gallery, a sense that what was being said didn't align with what they were told. And then Jamira looked directly at Nathan. "Officer Blake told me," she said, her voice slow, deliberate, "that I was exactly the type of person he expected to pull over in that neighborhood." The words felt like a gust of icy wind in a sealed chamber. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom, quiet but potent. Nathan's mouth opened, then closed. His face went flush, then pale. He shot up from his seat, eyes wide with panic and frustration. "That's a lie," he barked, voice booming across the room. "She's lying." Gasps broke out around the courtroom. The judge slammed his gavel once, twice. "Order. Officer Blake, you are out of line." But Nathan wasn't listening. He pointed at Jamira with a trembling finger. "She's twisting everything. She's just trying to make us look like monsters. I never said that. She's lying to you." Jamira didn't flinch, not even a blink. His outburst wasn't just a violation of courtroom decorum, it was a confession of his fear, not of being wrong, but of being exposed. For a moment his training, his badge, the chain of command, none of it mattered. He saw her not as a witness, but as a threat. The judge's voice cut through the noise. "Officer Blake, you will sit down now, or be removed from this courtroom." Nathan stared at Jamira for another 2 seconds. Then he dropped into his seat, breathing heavily, his hands shaking with barely concealed rage. The defense attorney leaned in to whisper something, but Nathan jerked his head away. His composure was gone, his control shattered. Jamira turned back toward the jury box, her voice softer now, but no less piercing. "I'm not surprised by his reaction," she said, her tone measured. "Black women like me have been called liars for centuries, especially when we speak out against power." Those words didn't echo, they hung, heavy, immovable, a history condensed into one sentence. One of the jurors, a middle-aged black woman with tired eyes, pressed her lips together. She nodded, just slightly. It was the kind of affirmation only another survivor could give, quiet and reverent. Jamira continued. "I was terrified that night. But I remembered something my grandmother once told me. She said, if the world refuses to hear your voice, make sure it can never forget your silence." There was a long pause. The prosecutor asked the next question, but Jamira held up her hand gently, asking for a moment. The judge raised an eyebrow, curious. Her gaze scanned the room, as if looking past the present and deep into memory. Then she spoke, calm and deliberate. "I have something else to share." The room froze. Even Nathan blinked. The judge sat back. "Miss Holton, please explain." Jamira reached into her bag, pulled out a small black flash drive, and placed it on the wooden barrier in front of her. "This contains a recording I made the night I was arrested," she said. "It's unedited. The full audio of everything that happened, including what was said before they realized I was still recording." Gasps again, but now tinged with realization. "Miss Holton," the prosecutor asked, stunned, "why didn't you submit this before?" "I was told not to," she said, her eyes glancing briefly toward the gallery, "by someone who said it might get me killed." The temperature in the room dropped. The judge leaned forward. The defense attorney looked suddenly pale. The prosecutor stared at the flash drive like it was ticking. He looked to the judge, who gave a slow, reluctant nod. "We'll take a recess," Judge Grissom announced, voice quieter now, but firm, "and we'll hear what's on that recording." Jamira stood slowly, her hands still trembling. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply met Nathan's eyes, and for the first time he looked away. But behind him, an older officer whispered to another, a whisper Jamira couldn't hear, but one that would change everything. Because somewhere in the halls of power, panic was setting in. And someone was preparing to make sure that flash drive never reached the record. As the courtroom emptied for recess, a tall man in a gray suit left the gallery quietly. He stepped into a hallway, pulled out his phone, and whispered into it, "It's active." She brought it. "Handle it." Then he disappeared through a side door. As Jamira Holton stepped out of the courtroom, the hallway outside felt like a tunnel, narrow, darkened by doubt, yet lit faintly by the flame of resistance she'd carried all her life. Her grip on the flash drive remained tight, not just for security, but for grounding. The small object pulsed with weight far greater than plastic and data. It held the story they tried to erase. But before this building, before the glares of men in uniform and the backroom whispers of destruction, there was a girl from Detroit. Not the Detroit in tourist photos, the Detroit where liquor stores outnumbered libraries, where sirens were lullabies and streetlights flickered like dying stars. That was Jamira's Detroit. The East Side, cracked pavement, boarded windows, and schools where ceiling tiles fell faster than graduation rates. Jamira was raised by her grandmother, Gloria, steel-willed, Bible-quoting, always smelling of shea butter and peppermint. Gloria worked nights cleaning an office building downtown. She never complained. "Baby," she'd whisper after every shift, slipping out of her uniform and into her stories. "They got clean glass 'cause I wipe it, but don't you ever let 'em think you're the one meant to stay invisible." That phrase stuck, invisible. It etched itself into Jamira's soul like scripture. As a child, she learned that black women were either ignored or feared, depending on how loud they got. So Jamira chose a third way: documentation. At 12, she asked for a second-hand camcorder instead of birthday clothes. At 15, she'd built a digital archive of neighborhood evictions, police stops, and food stamp denials. She was quiet, methodical, a watcher of patterns. She believed in facts, not volume. By the time she reached Howard University, her reputation had grown. Professors knew her for her sharp essays on structural inequality. Classmates admired her for her integrity. But she wasn't flashy. She never led rallies with megaphones or went viral with hashtags. Her activism lived in hard drives and community trainings. She taught others how to record police interactions legally, how to preserve metadata, how to use silence as a strategy. But even strategy couldn't save her from what came next. The night in question wasn't extraordinary until it was. She'd left the community center late after tutoring kids in math. Her niece Zariah sat beside her in the passenger seat, headphones in, humming to something only the young understand. The streets were damp from a light rain, headlights glinting off puddles like tiny mirrors. She was blocks from home when the red and blue lights blinked behind her. Jamira pulled over calmly. Her license and registration sat in a labeled folder inside her glove compartment. Her hands moved in slow motion, always visible. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. So had every black person she knew. The officer approached. Another followed behind. Their words were clipped from the start. One asked if she'd been drinking. She hadn't. The other accused her of swerving. She hadn't. But when she asked politely why she'd been stopped, something shifted. The temperature dropped. Nathan Blake was the rookie, still in the honeymoon stage of the badge, still echoing the bravado of locker room talk. He told her to watch the attitude. She blinked. She asked again, more softly this time, what the violation was. His face turned cold. He told her to get out. She asked if she was being detained. He said, "Don't make this harder." Then came the moment. The snap. Her phone, which had been sitting in the cup holder, recording from the second the lights appeared behind her, was knocked down during the confusion as one officer opened the door. It didn't stop recording. They cuffed her in front of her niece. Zaria screamed. No one comforted the child. They put Jamira in the back of the cruiser without reading her rights. For nearly an hour, they left her there, engine running, no explanation. She sat in the dark, breathing slowly, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, heart thudding louder than the police radio. When she was finally released hours later, no charges, no apology, she retrieved her phone. The recording was still there. 2 hours of audio, voices, threats, names. What she heard when she played it back nearly broke her. Laughter, crude jokes, comments about typical ones like her. One officer mocking the way she asked for a lawyer. Another asking if she was one of those woke types with a podcast. Nathan's voice saying flatly, "She's lying, that's what they do. They lie so we look bad." Jamira didn't cry. She didn't scream. She backed up the audio, then backed it up again, then sent it to a friend across the country, then another. But sharing it wasn't easy. When she tried to report what happened, the precinct brushed her off. Internal Affairs never returned her calls. A lawyer she contacted mysteriously dropped her case after one conversation. Her job at the community center suddenly came under scrutiny. An anonymous tip alleged inappropriate behavior around children. The center put her on leave. She was being erased. Still, Jamira remained calm. She documented everything. Emails, call logs, officer names, every strange car parked outside her building. Every time Zaria said she felt like someone was watching their house. One day, she walked into the local courthouse with her flash drive and asked to file a formal civil rights complaint. The clerk who assisted her, Miles Jensen, was the first person who didn't look through her. He printed the paperwork, checked her documentation, and quietly asked, "Do you have a safe place to keep a copy of that?" Jamira nodded. Miles handed her a post-it note with a number scribbled on it. "If they push back, call this journalist. She's real. She doesn't scare easy." And that was how the walls began to crack. But standing in that courtroom now, Jamira knew something more dangerous was brewing. The reaction from Nathan, the eyes of the older officer behind him, the man in the gray suit who'd left through the side door. Someone wanted this recording buried so badly, they were willing to sabotage the courts, risk public outrage, maybe worse. Her phone had captured more than proof. It had captured rot. And still she couldn't forget the sound of Zaria crying in the car that night, or the way she'd whispered later, "Why were they so mean, Auntie? You didn't do anything." That was the part that haunted her. Not what happened to her, but what her niece saw. Jamira knew that some truths weren't for the courtroom. Some were meant to stay locked in memory, whispered in safe kitchens and late-night phone calls. But this truth, this audio, had clawed its way from silence. It demanded air. And yet, not even she was prepared for what else it had captured. Because hours before her testimony, Jamira had played back the file one final time, checking it for clarity. And she'd heard something new. A voice deep unfamiliar at the very end of the tape. It wasn't part of the traffic stop. It was recorded after she was placed in the back of the cruiser. A conversation between officers she hadn't heard that night. One of them said, "She's not the first. Just make sure this one doesn't come back." And then, chillingly, the other voice, "We missed the last phone. Don't miss this one." As Jamira walked back into the courtroom, flash drive in hand, she whispered to herself, "They knew I was recording." What she didn't know was, someone else had recorded them too. Nathan Blake sat frozen in the courtroom hallway, his jaw locked, knees apart, palms on his thighs like a man preparing for war but unsure where the bullets would come from. The outburst he'd hurled just minutes ago reverberated in his ears, louder now in silence than it had been in the moment. Rage was retreating, making room for fear, but not fear of being wrong, fear of being exposed. For Nathan, the line between truth and loyalty had never been a blurred one. It simply hadn't existed. Born and raised in Benton Hollow, a small predominantly white town in upstate New York, Nathan grew up surrounded by people who looked like him, thought like him, and feared what they didn't understand. His father was a mechanic. His mother worked at the diner, where regulars drank black coffee and repeated the same stories about how things used to be. In school, the one black student in his grade was treated like a guest, welcome but never quite trusted. There were no diversity assemblies, no protests, no talk of inequality. Benton Hollow was proud of being untouched, unchanged. A place where 4th of July parades still featured Confederate flags without irony, and phrases like colorblind were thrown around like compliments. Nathan's uncle, an ex-cop turned firearms instructor, used to sit him on his lap and say, "Son, there are two types of people in this world. those who keep the peace, and those who break it. You gotta decide early which one you are. So he decided, and he never looked back. At 21, he joined the police academy. His instructors praised him for being sharp, disciplined, and fearless. What they really meant was obedient. He asked no questions, memorized protocols, recited law. But beneath that shiny exterior of loyalty was a seed, a belief sown early and fertilized by silence, that black people were inherently unpredictable, dangerous, unruly. The same way his uncle had said, you can spot trouble before it walks up to you. It's in how they move, how they look at you. He never questioned that. When he was transferred to a major city precinct, Nathan arrived wide-eyed and tight-lipped. He didn't drink, didn't joke with the older guys much, and never shared personal stories. But he watched, and what he saw didn't disturb him, it reassured him. Black neighborhoods patrolled more often. Black teens frisked more quickly. Black drivers stopped with fewer reasons. The unwritten rules matched the ones he'd been raised on. The first time he drew his weapon was during a wellness check in a predominantly black apartment complex. An elderly woman had accidentally triggered her medical alert device. She opened the door disoriented, and he yelled for her to show her hands. She looked terrified. Afterward, his partner laughed and said, "Blake, you can't scare the grandmas, at least not till they pull a frying pan." Nathan laughed too, but inside, something cracked, and he buried it. So when he pulled Jamira Holton over that night, it wasn't about her speeding. She hadn't. It wasn't about erratic driving. There wasn't any. It was the car. A clean late-model sedan in a neighborhood they'd been told was hot. It was her. Black, composed, asking too many questions. She didn't cower. She didn't plead. She stayed calm, even polite. And that, more than anything, unnerved him. He'd expected fear, submission, but she looked at him like he was just another man in a uniform. Fallible, flawed, human. That gaze pierced the armor his upbringing had taught him to wear. In that moment, she became what his uncle warned him about. The trouble that didn't yell or fight but simply refused to bend. That's why he snapped. That's why he shoved the car door wider, told her to step out, said she was resisting when she wasn't. It wasn't procedure. It wasn't law. It was ego, and fear, and years of unspoken conditioning hardening into action. Later that night, when she was released without charges, he expected nothing would come of it. The paperwork had been vague enough. The other officers knew the drill. There would be no complaint. She'd learned her lesson. But she hadn't. And now, sitting outside the courtroom, Nathan realized just how wrong he'd been. He thought about the audio. What had it caught? He couldn't remember everything that was said that night. Just fragments. Someone joked about her woke glasses. Someone else called her one of the educated ones. He remembered saying something, he wasn't sure what, but it hadn't been kind. He was sure of that. The panic settled in like a fog. He'd called her a liar in open court, but now, he wasn't sure she had lied at all. Inside, the court clerk passed the flash drive to a technician, who connected it to the courtroom's audio system. The judge's face was unreadable, but Nathan could tell something had shifted. There was a new gravity, a turning tide. His defense attorney leaned toward him, whispering sharply, "If that recording is what she claims, you're not just looking at disciplinary action, you're looking at a departmental scandal." Nathan's stomach twisted. "What does she even want?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "She wants to burn the whole system down," the attorney replied quietly. "And if that tape's legit, she might just succeed." But what neither of them knew, what no one in that courtroom knew, was that someone else had already started digging. Someone not in uniform. Someone not on record. A quiet figure from internal affairs who'd been watching the precinct for months. And what they were about to find would make Jamira's flash drive look like the tip of a sinking iceberg. Because Nathan's arrogance wasn't just a personal flaw. It was the first domino. And now, it was falling. As Nathan reached into his pocket to silence his buzzing phone, he saw the caller ID, unknown number. He answered. A distorted voice whispered, "They know. Check your locker." The line went dead. The sky that evening was the color of bruised steel, clouds heavy, low, and watching. The streets glistened under a light drizzle, and everything shimmered with the illusion of calm. Jamira Holton sat behind the wheel of her Toyota Corolla, her niece Zaria nestled in the passenger seat, humming to herself with the rhythm of earbuds and innocence. They had just left the community center, where Jamira stayed late to help a young boy write an essay about Harriet Tubman. She was tired, but her spirit felt full. Another day of planting seeds, of building something better. That feeling vanished when the blue and red lights snapped on behind her. She saw them flash in the rearview mirror, like a predator's eyes. 1, 2, 3 patrol cars. Her chest tightened. She hadn't been speeding. She hadn't rolled a stop. She was just driving. Black, female, and upright in a neighborhood still healing from years of redlining and invisible fences. Jamira pulled over slowly, her hands moving like ballet. Visible, open, deliberate. The engine idled. She reached for her phone, tapped the screen twice, and placed it in the cup holder, angled just right. Recording. She always recorded. Zaria peeked up, sensing the change. "Auntie, why they stopping us?" Jamira smiled without joy. "Just be still, baby. Everything's all right." The first officer approached. She didn't recognize him at first. Nathan Blake, his jaw tight, face unreadable. Behind him was another officer, broader, older, with his hand already near his holster. Jamira rolled down the window and waited. "License and registration." She handed them over silently. "Know why we pulled you over?" "No, sir, I don't." "You failed to signal your last turn." That was a lie. She had signaled. She always did. "I believe I did signal," she replied, careful, polite. The officer's posture stiffened. "Ma'am, are you questioning my judgment?" "I'm just saying." "You got attitude now?" Zaria's breath caught. Jamira felt the temperature shift. "I'd like to understand what's happening," Jamira said gently. The second officer moved closer. "Step out of the car." "Am I being detained?" "Step out now." Jamira hesitated for a fraction of a second, and in that sliver of time, everything spiraled. The car door was yanked open. Her seatbelt snapped free. Hands grabbed her jacket, twisted her arm. She heard Zaria scream, "Stop!" She didn't do anything, but the voices of the officers drowned hers out. "You're resisting." She wasn't. "You're making this worse for yourself." She wasn't. Handcuffs clamped around her wrists, metal biting into her skin. Her knee hit the pavement. She gasped, not from pain, but from disbelief. The wet ground soaked through her jeans, grounding her in a nightmare. A small crowd had started to form. A man recording on his phone, a woman yelling, "Let her go," but the officers moved with practiced precision. Create chaos, control the story. They shoved her into the back of the cruiser without explanation. The door slammed, the silence inside was suffocating. Her phone still recording in the cup holder had captured everything. And more was yet to come. Outside, she saw them talking, laughing. She couldn't hear them clearly through the thick glass, but their gestures were relaxed, casual, as if this was just another routine stop in a long day of routine power. She stared at their lips, trying to read them. One said something about another mouthy one. The other replied with a smirk. Then they turned toward her car, opened the passenger side. Zaria was still inside, crying. Jamira screamed through the glass, "Don't touch her." But they waved off her niece with a bored command. "Go home. We don't need you here." And just like that, a 10-year-old girl was left alone in the street, heartbroken, terrified and invisible. No one explained anything to Jamira. Not at the station, not in the holding cell. She sat for hours. Her hands turned purple from the cuffs. Her requests for a lawyer were ignored. They took her fingerprints, but no charges were filed. They told her she was lucky they didn't pursue obstruction. When they finally let her go, it was 2:17 a.m. Her car had been towed. She walked 4 miles home. The next morning, she retrieved her phone from the impound office. It had been tossed into the glove compartment, screen cracked but still functional. She opened the voice memo app and hit play. 2 hours and 17 minutes of uncut audio. The screams, the insults, the threats, the silence. But near the end, something new. A conversation between the two officers, after they'd placed her in the back seat and assumed the recording had stopped. She's the educated type, thinks she can outtalk the law. What do we put in the report? Non-compliant, disrespectful, make it match the template. And then, chillingly, Nathan's voice again. Doesn't matter what she says, they always crack under pressure. Jamira sat in her living room, hands trembling, phone against her chest. Zaria slept in the other room, curled into a ball, still shaken. She wanted to cry, scream, burn everything. Instead, she pressed a few buttons and saved the file in 3 places. Then she copied it to a flash drive. Then she sat still and whispered to herself, "This isn't just proof, it's power." She didn't know then that the audio would be the key to a much larger door, that the recording would reveal more than racism. It would reveal orchestration, patterns, cover-ups. It would unearth ghosts buried under procedural language and departmental shielding. But what she did know was this. Her scream had been ignored by every officer that night, every bystander who looked away, every system that didn't answer her calls. But the mic didn't ignore her. It recorded. It remembered. And now, it was ready to speak. That night, while Jamira slept, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. A single text appeared. "You don't know what else that mic caught, but we do." The walls of the precinct weren't made of brick and mortar alone. They were built from silence, thick, deliberate, enforced silence. Conversations cut off when doors opened, eyes that darted, then looked away. What began as camaraderie eventually calcified into collusion, and within those walls, the line between loyalty and law dissolved into nothing at all. For rookie cops like Nathan Blake, it wasn't something that had to be taught in writing. It was the air he breathed from day one. Day one, locker room. "You're one of us now," said Officer Rudd, slapping him on the back, his tone both congratulatory and cautionary. "We bleed blue. Not black, not white, just blue." Everyone laughed, but Nathan noticed who didn't. The two black officers in the corner. Quiet, tired, finishing their shifts with unreadable faces. He wanted to ask what that meant, why they didn't laugh, but he didn't. Questions weren't part of the culture. Obedience was. Over time, the jokes grew sharper, louder. "She looked like a runner, so I had to cuff her before she got ideas." Another welfare queen with an attitude. "Bet her name starts with law something." Nathan smiled at first, uncertain. Then he chuckled, to blend in. Then finally, he added to the noise, because silence in that room was more dangerous than anything else. The precinct operated on two codes, one public, one private. The public one was justice, duty, honor. But the private code, the one they lived by, was something darker. If an officer lied on a report, you didn't correct it. If someone rough-handled a suspect, you looked away. If a complaint was filed, it disappeared. Internal affairs was viewed like a foreign enemy. Officers who questioned the system were called snitches, or soft. No one wanted to partner with someone who didn't understand the game. They called it the brotherhood. But for Jamira Holton, it was something else. It was the silence that swallowed her screams. It was the laughter after the cuffs. It was the fake citations, the missing evidence, the erasures. The flash drive she now held in her purse didn't just contain one night's worth of racism. It captured a virus, a pattern. And the most damning part wasn't what they said. It was how casually they said it. The recording revealed a culture too comfortable with hate. Officers laughing as they rehearsed false statements. A sergeant joking about throwing in a resisting charge just in case. Nathan asking, should we list the other one as a concerned witness or threatening bystander? One voice, deep and smooth, remarked, "You know the court eats this stuff up. Just frame it the right way and it's gospel." The problem wasn't just the content. It was the tone. There was no panic, no fear of consequences. Only confidence. That they could say anything, do anything, and be protected. Back at the precinct, the officers weren't unaware of the recording. Word had spread, not officially, but in whispers, sideways glances, guarded conversations. One detective, Morales, stopped Blake in the hall and asked, "You know what's on that thing?" Nathan didn't answer. "She's got names," Morales continued. "And you know what names mean." "Collateral?" "No. Collapse." Blake didn't respond. He knew Morales was right. The flash drive was no longer just evidence in a single arrest. It was a fuse. And somewhere in the building, that fuse was inching toward detonation. Meanwhile, in a narrow break room behind the holding cells, a group of senior officers huddled. Sergeant Whitaker, veteran of 25 years, leaned against the wall, sipping bitter coffee. "She's not bluffing," one said. "She's too calm." Whitaker nodded. "She's smart, dangerous. That's the worst kind." "Then what?" another officer asked. "We make her go away?" "No, we make the story go away." The plan wasn't new. The same blueprint had been used before. Discredit the victim. Leak a disciplinary report to local media. Create doubt. Find an unrelated infraction. Misdemeanors, school suspensions, unpaid fines, anything that could be turned into a smear. But Jamira had nothing. No criminal record. No scandal. Just silence. And that's what scared them most. She didn't yell. She recorded. And recording, they'd learned, was more dangerous than a riot. What they didn't know was that someone inside the precinct was already breaking the code. A young black officer named Elijah Hart had overheard one of the planning meetings. He wasn't new to racism, but something about this case hit deeper. He knew Jamira from the community. She once hosted a youth program his cousin attended. He remembered her voice, soft but unflinching, the kind that didn't seek confrontation but refused to retreat. That night, Elijah waited until the precinct quieted. He slipped into the evidence room and searched for the intake log on Jamira's arrest. Nothing. No official entry. No body cam footage uploaded. No citation copy. It was as if the arrest never happened. And that told him everything. He took a risk. Sent an encrypted tip to a legal watchdog group in DC. Not with his name. Not yet. Just a copy of the logbook showing the absence of any record. Across town, Jamira sat on her living room floor, the flash drive plugged into her laptop. She was replaying the final 2 minutes again, over and over. The same phrase haunted her. They always crack under pressure. She had, but not the way they expected. She'd cracked open their lies. Their scripts. Their shields. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A new message. No contact ID. Just a sentence. There's more than just your night. They're hiding patterns. Attached was a single audio file. Unknown origin. Jamira clicked play. It was an internal meeting. Officers joking about quotas, mocking community complaints, one laughing, just say suspicious behavior, and that's your license. Another voice. These people file complaints like it's bingo night. Just ignore them. Then a third voice, chillingly familiar. Nathan's. Even if they record, it's their word against ours. Who do you think the court believes? Jamira's breath caught. Because that wasn't from her night. It was from someone else's. And it meant the corruption wasn't a single incident. It was institutional. Layered. Protected. But now, documented. She copied the new file. And backed it up. And somewhere, miles away, Elijah watched the tip he sent climb its way up the legal ranks toward someone who wouldn't ignore it. The next morning, before sunrise, a civil rights attorney named Dorian Price received an unmarked envelope on his doorstep. Inside was a flash drive and a sticky note that read, "You're the last wall before this breaks." The morning light in Detroit didn't feel like dawn. It felt like exposure, like shadows had been forced to retreat. Jamira sat in her small kitchen, holding her cup of lukewarm coffee with both hands, eyes locked on the laptop screen in front of her. On it, 2 folders blinked like warning signs. One labeled Original Audio, the other Anonymous Tip. She'd listened to both a dozen times, memorized the cadence of their voices, the smugness, the casual disdain. But what she hadn't yet pieced together was how the lie was built. She knew she was innocent. She knew she had followed every rule. But the system hadn't just targeted her. It constructed a narrative where guilt was preloaded and innocence had to claw its way back to breath. The story they wrote about her began hours after the arrest. Inside the precinct, officers huddled around a terminal in the records room. Officer Burns, balding, eyes dull from years of paperwork and compromises, typed rapidly. Next to him, Sergeant Whitaker read off details from a yellow notepad. She was confrontational, refused orders, and say she lunged when we asked her to step out. Burns paused. She didn't lunge. Whitaker raised an eyebrow. You want to tell that to IA when this thing spirals? Burns didn't answer. He kept typing. Include something about her trying to conceal an object. Another voice chimed in. Officer Rudd, notorious for his embellished reports. We'll say it looked like a weapon. That'll justify the level of force. Whitaker nodded. Good. Say she reached into the center console. You don't have to say she had a weapon. Just that it looked like it. Ambiguity protects us, Burns muttered, finishing the entry. By the end of that shift, Jamira Holton's name was linked to a fabricated incident report that would portray her as erratic, non-compliant, and potentially dangerous. The body cam footage never turned on, was conveniently lost due to technical malfunction. And the dash cam, edited, trimmed to show her stepping out of the car with a slight stutter in movement, just enough to suggest tension, enough to support the narrative. It wasn't just one officer. It never was. It was a chain. Rudd typed the witness addendum. Burns submitted the use of force justification. Whitaker approved the report. Captain Delaney signed off without blinking. And the city's digital record system accepted it all like scripture. Jamira's reputation was next. 2 days after the arrest, a local blog received an anonymous tip that she had a history of disruptive behavior at the community center. The center director received an official complaint from a parent who claimed Jamira pushed leftist ideas on children and disrespected law enforcement. No name was attached to the complaint. It didn't matter. She was asked to take an indefinite leave pending review. The silence that followed wasn't accidental. It was orchestration. And still, Jamira waited, patiently, quietly. She backed up the files again. She started a new document. Names, dates, exact quotes from the audio. A timeline was building. Across town, attorney Dorian Price sat in his office, scanning the flash drive that had arrived with the handwritten note. The audio quality was uneven, but the words were crystal clear. We frame her as aggressive. She reached into the console. They'll believe that. Don't mention the kid. It complicates the optics. Dorian leaned back, heart pounding. He'd represented dozens of civil rights cases, most of them dismissed, buried under bureaucracy. But this wasn't just a complaint. It was conspiracy. He picked up the phone and called a friend at the Department of Civil Oversight. You need to hear this. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, cracks were forming. Officer Elijah Hart, still quietly watching, noticed something strange. He had been reviewing recent dispatch logs and realized that the timestamps didn't align with the official report. The stop was listed at 9:42 p.m., but the first radio entry wasn't until 10:06. And even then, the call log read, routine vehicle check, status clear. No resistance, no escalation. The log had been altered. Elijah took photos of the original handwritten sheet, the one taped beside the dispatch desk. Then he emailed a copy to a private inbox he kept outside the system. It was time-stamped and undeniable. Jamira, meanwhile, began transcribing the audio herself. Every name, every word. She noticed a pattern in the voices, certain phrases used repeatedly by certain officers, code words, it seemed. Matched the template. Type 2 defiance, console reach. They'd done this before. She was not the first. And suddenly, she realized the power of what she held. This wasn't just a mistake or bias. It was a method. Designed. Taught. Protected. Her skin had made her suspicious. Her voice had made her dangerous. But her recording made her a threat. She uploaded the files to an encrypted server, created a link, and drafted an email to 3 investigative journalists. Then she paused. Not fear strategy. She needed to wait for the court date. Let the defense think they were ahead. Let them commit to the lie one more time. The courtroom would be the strike zone. The audio, the evidence. But now, she had something else. Something more damning. As she replayed the anonymous audio file sent to her phone, a new segment emerged. A segment she hadn't noticed before. Near the end of the clip, after the planning, after the laughter, one officer, perhaps unaware the mic was still live, spoke in a hushed tone. We gotta get ahead of this. She's smart. If this leaks, another replied, then bury her in procedure, drag it, drain her. That's how we win. And finally, the voice that chilled her blood, Nathan Blake. She'll break, they always do. Jamira clicked pause. No, not this time. As Jamira prepared to leave for court, her phone buzzed. Another unknown message appeared. This time, just 3 words. They know everything. Attached was a photo. Her apartment door, taken from the hallway. That morning. The DA's office sat on the 10th floor of a gray concrete building that looked more like a fortress than a place where justice was decided. Inside, the walls were covered in plaques and commendations, awards for high conviction rates, for excellence in prosecution, for protecting the community. Not a single photo of a survivor, not one portrait of a wrongfully accused. When Jamira stepped off the elevator with her attorney, Dorian Price, she could feel the air shift. It wasn't just cold, it was curated, designed to intimidate, to unsettle. Dorian whispered beside her. Keep your energy neutral. They don't want the truth, they want weakness. They were there to present the recording officially, to make it part of the case file, to ensure it couldn't be buried. But from the moment they entered the small conference room, they knew this wasn't going to be straightforward. Assistant District Attorney Cheryl Dorsey was already seated. White, mid-50s, sharp cheekbones, and colder eyes. She greeted them with professional detachment, the kind that made you feel like an entry on a spreadsheet. The man beside her, ADA Paul Henson, barely nodded. Young, clean-cut, and painfully ambitious. Dorian slid the flash drive across the table. This contains audio from the arrest, uncut. It includes fabricated charges, racial profiling, and coordinated cover-up. Cheryl picked it up like it might bite. We'll review it and determine if it's admissible. Dorian didn't blink. This isn't a suggestion. This is evidence. Paul leaned forward, feigning concern. And you're saying this was recorded by the victim herself? She's not a victim. She's a witness to systemic abuse, Dorian corrected. Cheryl sighed, a subtle roll of her eyes. We understand emotions are high. This isn't about emotions, Dorian snapped. It's about facts. Jamira watched them volley, silent but alert. Her skin was humming, her mind moving like a chessboard. Every time Cheryl used the word alleged, she noticed. Every time Paul glanced at his phone mid-conversation, she clocked it. They weren't preparing to fight for her. They were preparing to contain her. When Cheryl finally said, "We'll add it to the discovery file," her tone made it clear. They planned to bury it in paperwork, not justice. The meeting ended quickly. No apologies. No follow-up questions. No outrage. Outside the office, in the elevator, Dorian exhaled. They're not going to do a damn thing. Jamira looked at him. Why? He paused. Because police win trials, and prosecutors win when police win. It was a system built not on truth, but on partnership. The DA's office relied on officers to bring in convictions, to testify, to maintain the pipeline. Challenging them meant severing the very artery that fed the courtroom its lifeblood. So prosecutors rarely asked questions they didn't want answers to. Jamira remembered reading an article once, how in cases involving officer misconduct, over 90% were dismissed before even reaching court. Not because the evidence wasn't strong, but because the risk of upsetting the alliance between badge and bench was too high. And now, she was living that truth. Back home, she received an official letter 3 days later. It read like a form rejection. The evidence presented will be subject to internal review. No further action is required at this time. No mention of the racial slurs. No mention of the threats. Just silence, repackaged as procedure. The real weight wasn't in the words. It was in what wasn't said. That night, Jamira stared at the document and whispered, "So they heard me, and they still don't care." She wasn't shocked, just exhausted. Until the next morning, when her inbox dinged with an unexpected email. No subject, no sender name. The message was short. "We met once. I didn't forget your eyes." Attached 3 internal memos, 1 sealed report. She opened the first file. It was a memo from the district attorney to Cheryl Dorsey, dated 2 days before their meeting. It read, "This case presents serious optics risk. Recommend shelving the evidence to avoid undermining departmental trust. Public backlash will be temporary. Do not escalate." The second memo was worse. "Maintain status quo. Do not pursue charges against officers unless forced. Court confidence depends on perceived officer reliability. Let this blow over." The third file made her blood still. It was a sealed document, marked private communication. A summary of multiple police misconduct complaints in the same district. 6 different names, all dismissed quietly, patterns that mirrored her own case. One officer featured in all 6, Nathan Blake. And then the final line, "Do not disclose, contained for internal integrity." Jamira's stomach dropped. They had known. Long before her. They'd known and done nothing. She closed her laptop and called Dorian. "We need to move fast." Across town, Elijah Hart received a text from an encrypted account. "She knows." No name, but he knew who it meant. And it meant the game had changed. Because Jamira no longer stood alone. That evening, as Jamira stepped onto her porch, a man in plain clothes stood at the edge of her walkway. He didn't smile. He just said, "You don't know me, but I'm the reason that report exists. And they're going to come after both of us now." The man at the edge of Jamira's walkway didn't move when she stepped forward. His posture was unassuming, but his eyes, sharp, restless, calculating, spoke of someone who had lived too long watching truth suffocate behind rules.
"My name's Miles,"
he said, voice low, steady. "Miles Rivers. I work in the circuit clerk's office." Jamira didn't respond at first. Her hand hovered near her purse, not out of fear, but instinct. It wasn't the first time someone had approached her since the arrest. She'd received anonymous texts, letters with no return address. But this felt different. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't aggressive. He looked tired. "You sent the emails," she said finally. He nodded. "Not all of them. But I got you the sealed report." Her throat tightened. "Why?" Miles stepped closer, glancing up and down the street. "Because I've seen too many people like you disappear in paperwork, erased before they can speak." She let him in. Slowly, warily. Inside, they sat at her kitchen table, Miles with his coat still on, Jamira with her laptop open. He didn't look like a whistleblower. No trench coat, no dramatics, just a man who had grown used to watching injustice camouflaged in legal jargon. "I started in records over a decade ago," Miles began. "At first I thought I was just filing, just processing. But the longer I stayed, the more I saw patterns. Complaints that vanished, misconduct logs that never reached public records." He rubbed his hands together, as if trying to scrub off memories. "You weren't the first," he added. "You were just the first to fight with documentation." Jamira's voice was quiet but firm. "I didn't fight, I just refused to shut up." "Same thing," he replied with a tired smile. Miles explained how he had first stumbled across her case, how he noticed the arrest file's digital ID didn't match the precinct timestamp. Then when he cross-referenced it with other altered reports, he saw Nathan Blake's name come up again and again. along with Sergeant Whitaker's. They were using a soft erase tactic, Miles explained, modifying details without deleting the core record. That way, if anything ever came to light, the files would look clean, just altered enough to pass audits. He handed her a flash drive of his own. Verified metadata, he said. Time logs, location matches, and audio markers. Jamira's heart thudded. Audio markers? Miles nodded. I synced the background noise in your recording, the car radio dispatch chatter, with other audio files submitted to the court in previous cases. It proves your audio hasn't been tampered with, that it's real, clean, legal. A pause. And admissible. Jamira stared at the small plastic device like it held breath itself. Dorian had already believed her. Elijah had already helped her. But this was science. Undeniable. Proof with code behind it. But Miles wasn't finished. There's a firm out of D.C., he said. Harper and Lattimore, civil rights lawyers. They've been pushing back on cases like yours. Small-town suppression, department-level cover-ups. I've already reached out. They're interested. Jamira leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed not by fear but by a different, unfamiliar feeling. Validation. She exhaled, slowly. Why are you risking all this for me? Miles met her eyes. Because I've been sitting behind a desk watching people like you bleed for years. And I told myself being quiet kept me safe. But safety looks a lot like cowardice when truth walks in your door. They sat in silence for a while. Two strangers. Both witnesses, both tired of silence. It was late when Miles left. Jamira watched him walk down the sidewalk, fading into the amber glow of street lamps. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel isolated. But freedom, she was learning, came with surveillance. The next morning, her neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Oates, knocked on her door holding a paper bag of fresh bread and a worried look. There was a car parked out here since 5, she said. Didn't recognize it. 2 men, just sitting. Jamira's chest tightened. She looked out the window. The car was gone now, but her trash can had been moved, slightly, enough for someone to have hidden behind it. Later that day, her internet slowed to a crawl. Her phone dropped service intermittently. Twice, her mail didn't arrive. Paranoia? Maybe. But she trusted her instincts now. And she wasn't imagining the man in the beige windbreaker who accidentally followed her through 3 separate stores that week. Dorian confirmed it. They're watching, trying to spook you. She didn't flinch. Not this time. Instead, she emailed the audio files, the metadata, the sealed memos, everything, to Harper and Lattimore. Within 2 hours, she got a call. A woman's voice on the other end. We're ready to take this public, but you need to know, they'll fight dirtier now. Jamira looked out the window. The sidewalk was empty again. I've been dirty fought my whole life, she said. They're just louder this time. That night, as Jamira updated her files, a new alert popped up. Login attempt from unauthorized device. Location, Detroit PD internal server. It began with shadows. Subtle, unspoken, unsettling. The silver sedan showed up first, parked across the street from Jamira's apartment 3 mornings in a row. Different drivers, same idle engine, always reading something, or pretending to. The city was noisy, full of distractions, but Jamira had learned to notice patterns. This wasn't random, it was surveillance, plain and patient. Then came the phone calls. No voice, no words, just static. They came at 2:17 a.m., the same time she'd been released from the station weeks earlier. A cruel reminder, a psychological blueprint. Erode the nerves, chip away at sleep, at focus, at will. Jamira didn't flinch. Not externally, but something inside her tightened each day. An emotional brace she'd learned from generations of black women who had smiled through scrutiny, cooked through court dates, braided hair while waiting on verdicts. Still, she couldn't pretend this didn't affect her, especially when it reached her family. Her younger brother Rashad, who worked as a substitute teacher, called her one afternoon. His voice was trembling, something she hadn't heard since their mother passed. They came to my job, he said. 2 plainclothes, said they were checking into external affiliations, asked if you'd ever been in trouble, asked if I knew about your recordings. Jamira's spine stiffened. They told my principal I was part of something anti-police. Now they're putting my job under review. She apologized 3 times, but Rashad wouldn't let her finish. Don't say sorry, just be safe. We knew they'd do this. We didn't know you'd be the one strong enough to make them scared. Click. And the silence afterward hurt more than the threats. The next hit came through her landlord, a sudden inspection notice, then another, then a complaint of unusual noise and activity from a neighbor Jamira had never spoken to. She lived alone. She barely played music above a whisper. The message wasn't subtle, it was pressure. One afternoon, she returned from a meeting with Harper and Lattimore and found her front door slightly ajar. She hadn't left it that way. Her breath paused in her throat. She stepped back, immediately calling Dorian, who told her to wait in the hallway. He arrived 12 minutes later with a private investigator from the firm. Inside, nothing was missing. But everything had been moved. Not ransacked, strategically altered. Her kitchen chair was nudged at an angle. Her flash drive box was opened, contents still intact but shuffled. One of her plants had been moved an inch to the left. It was psychological warfare. They wanted her to know. And that meant they didn't fear consequence. They expected protection. Miles confirmed it that night. I intercepted an internal email chain, unmarked, but it referenced a domestic subversion source that needed containment. You're listed as DS003. Jamira laughed once, sharp and humorless. Containment. Like I'm a virus. Miles looked at her. You are. To them, your infection by truth. Still, she didn't run. She didn't hide. She stayed. But she did act. She created new backups of the files on 2 different drives, uploaded one to a cloud under a pseudonym, and mailed another to a distant cousin in Atlanta with a note that simply read, "Hold on to this. If something happens, go public." Then she emailed an encrypted version to investigative journalist Asia Lattimore, the co-founder of the Harper firm and a former Pulitzer Prize winner known for her work on systemic injustice. Her message was brief. They're not just coming after me. They're coming after the record. Asia called within the hour. I'll meet you tomorrow, she said. Bring everything. We'll triple encrypt it and get it in front of federal channels. Jamira agreed. That night she sat on her couch, surrounded by files, by digital fragments of a truth no one had wanted but that everyone now feared. She stared at her laptop, at the blinking folder labeled Core Evidence, and whispered, "You're not just proof, you're the mirror they tried to break." Then came the knock. Not a hard knock, just 3 soft taps. She looked through the peephole. No one. She opened the door slowly. On the ground was a single white envelope. Inside, a printed photo of her sitting in the courtroom, time-stamped, cropped, labeled. On the back, written in red marker.
This ends before you speak.
She didn't cry. She uploaded the image. Saved it. Then printed 3 copies and placed them into separate folders labeled insurance. The next morning, she noticed the silver sedan again. But this time, there was a sticker on the rear window. A police association badge. No pretense anymore. No denial. This wasn't rogue officers. This was the department. The institution. The badge itself. Not just watching. Not just warning. Hunting. Inside her apartment, Jamira sealed a manila envelope with one final flash drive. Across the city, Asia Lattimore's inbox pinged. The subject line read, "It's all yours now." But before she could open it, her screen went black. Asia Lattimore sat in front of her darkened computer screen, her reflection faintly visible in the glossy black. It had gone dark the moment Jamira's email hit her inbox. No warning, no system update, just gone. She didn't panic, not yet. This wasn't her first dance with digital sabotage, but something about the timing told her this wasn't random. This was a message. She reached for her backup device, powered it on, and booted into her secure OS. As the screen came to life, her heartbeat slowed. The file from Jamira was still there, intact, encrypted, time-stamped. It had survived. Asia sat back in her chair, exhaling through her nose, then picked up her phone and dialed a number by memory. "Dorian," she said when the line clicked. "I've got the package, and they know I do." There was a pause on the other end. "Then we'll get you protected. This isn't the first time you've carried something volatile." "No," she replied, "but this feels like the first time they're willing to kill it before it breathes." Asia was no stranger to danger. In her early 30s, with locks coiled into a bun and glasses always a bit crooked, she had built a reputation for chasing down what most journalists buried. She'd exposed bribery in city planning boards, unearthed the surveillance of Muslim students at state universities, and published a multi-part series on the forced sterilizations in Georgia correctional facilities. But this story wasn't just big, it was breathing. It had names, audio, patterns, timestamps. And for the first time in her career, the enemy wasn't hidden in the walls. It was the walls. She met Jamira the next morning at a discreet location. A bookstore that doubled as a cultural archive on Detroit's East Side. No cameras, no Wi-Fi, only dusty records and creaking floorboards. Jamira arrived with a small canvas bag and quiet resolve. I know they're watching you, she said.
They always are, Asia replied, even before they know what I've got.
Jamira handed over a second flash drive. This one has cross-referenced entries, metadata, badge numbers, filing inconsistencies. Miles and I pieced it together. Asia raised an eyebrow. Miles? A clerk, works quietly, risks louder. They sat in the back aisle between two shelves of jazz vinyls and trial transcripts. Asia plugged in the drive. As she read, her eyes narrowed. This isn't just bad policing, she muttered. This is coordinated falsification. Jamira nodded. I know. Asia's fingers flew across her keyboard as she mirrored the files, then compressed them for off-site upload. You know what happens next? She asked. Jamira exhaled. They come for you. She was right. 3 hours after Asia left the bookstore, she returned to her car to find all 4 tires slashed. No note, no camera nearby, just silence and a strange hush in the air, as if the city itself was trying to whisper, stop. Back at her newsroom, things got worse. Her editor, a weary man named Coleman who once championed her crusades, called her into his office. We've received a cease and desist, he said, holding up a legal letter like it was a poison dart. From the city law department. Claims you're attempting to publish classified materials that may compromise an ongoing investigation. Asia raised an eyebrow. What investigation? They didn't say. Exactly. Coleman leaned in. Asia, I believe you. I always have. But this is different. They've mentioned legal action, personal, not just institutional. They're naming you. I'm not afraid of lawsuits, she replied flatly. They're not threatening you with lawsuits, he whispered. They're talking security, physical. Asia didn't blink. Then let them come. He sighed. We'll print the story, but it won't go on the front page. Not yet. We need more than one source. You want a second whistleblower? He hesitated. Or at least something the public can recognize as irrefutable. She stood. If someone's got to bleed for the truth, it won't be quietly. Back at her apartment, Asia worked through the night. She mapped out the timeline, the audio, the badge overlaps. She created a database linking Jamira's arrest to 6 other cases. She dug through court records, cross-referenced dispatch logs, compared timestamps from hundreds of reports. One entry made her stomach drop. A woman named Khalila Moore, arrested 3 years ago under similar circumstances. No charges filed, complaints ignored. She died by suicide 4 months later. Asia's hands shook as she added Khalila's name to the chart. This wasn't just a story. This was an archive of unacknowledged war. The next morning, she received a call from her mother crying. Someone came to the house, she said. Said they were with the city, but they asked strange questions. About you, about your work. Asia clenched her jaw. She told her mother to leave for the weekend, stay with cousins. Then she changed the locks on her apartment, bought 2 new encrypted drives, and printed hard copies of every crucial document. She placed them into 3 packages. One she hid in a bank vault. One she mailed to a trusted friend in Chicago. The last she kept in her purse, always on her. That night, she stood in her apartment, looking at the city from her window. She thought of the badge she once respected, the shield once considered honorable. And she thought of Khalila, of Jamira, of every name that never made it to headlines. She pulled out her phone and recorded a voice memo. My name is Asia Lattimore. If you're hearing this, I've been silenced. The files exist, the truth exists. And if this reaches you, it means it can't be buried anymore. She hit save. Then she sat at her desk, opened the document, typed the headline. The evidence they tried to erase. How one black woman's recording exposed a system of racist policing in Detroit. Her finger hovered over the send to editor button, and she pressed it. Minutes later, her email bounced. A system error. Access denied. Then her screen froze, and a line of red text appeared. Do not publish. The lights in her apartment flickered, and then darkness. The courtroom was colder than usual. Not in temperature, but in presence. The kind of chill that wraps around your chest and whispers, today something shifts. Rows were filled with city officials, quiet reporters, officers in full uniform, and a jury that looked more alert than they had during any prior testimony. The air was dense, electric, uneasy. Jamira Holton walked into the courtroom with her shoulders squared and her head high, but inside, her stomach curled in knots. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. This was a reckoning. Behind her, Dorian Price moved like a shadow, placing a black briefcase gently onto the defense table. He opened it, removed a flash drive, and handed it to the courtroom tech. No words, just a nod. Asia Lattimore sat in the gallery, notepad in hand, but her eyes focused on the monitor like it held a live bomb. Judge Harold Grissom adjusted his glasses slowly, peering over them as if seeing everything in slow motion. "Mr. Price, you've requested to submit audio as new evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor," Dorian replied. "This recording was captured by the defendant on the night of her unlawful arrest. It has been authenticated, time-stamped, and cross-verified by digital analysts. Has this been reviewed by opposing counsel?" A reluctant nod from ADA Cheryl Dorsey. She didn't want this played. Everyone in the room knew that, but she couldn't legally suppress it anymore. "Proceed," the judge said. The tech inserted the drive and tapped a few keys. The courtroom screen illuminated, and the speakers gave a low crackle of static. Then silence. A soft voice broke it. Jamira's voice. "Good evening, officer. Can I ask why I've been pulled over?" Her tone was calm, controlled. Then, louder, Nathan Blake's voice. "Step out of the car. You're being non-compliant." The jurors leaned in. One tilted her head, scribbled something. On the screen, a timestamp flashed, 9:41 p.m. Jamira's voice again, quieter this time. "I haven't done anything wrong." Another voice gruffer cut in. "She fits the description." Typical one. Braids, mouthy. A gasp from the back of the room. Someone muttered, "Jesus." Judge Grissom didn't stop the tape. The audio rolled on. They dragged her out, called her difficult, said she lunged. Then, silence again, until the car door slammed. And what followed turned the room to stone. Two officers, Rudd and Blake, were heard chuckling. Another educated one. Thinks reading rights makes her innocent. Just match the report. Console reach. Add a threat. She'll get scared and shut up. More gasps. One juror covered her mouth. Another leaned back, jaw tight. The recording kept unraveling the lie. "She got a niece in the car. Don't matter. Let the little one watch. Teaches 'em early."
The courtroom erupted.
The judge banged his gavel. Odor. But he couldn't silence the fury building. The gallery rippled with murmurs, heads shaking, eyes burning. And then, the final nail. Nathan Blake's voice again. Cold, smug.
"She's lying. They always do."
The screen went black. Silence. Then Jamira stood. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't weep. She looked directly at the jury. "I was arrested for existing. Everything they said was crafted to make me look dangerous. But all I did was drive home." Her words weren't loud, but they echoed like thunder. The judge turned to the prosecution. "Do you have a response?" Cheryl Dorsey looked pale. "We request time to review and verify." "It's already verified," Dorian said. "You ignored it, buried it. Now it's public record." The judge paused. He didn't smile, didn't shift. He simply said, "The court will consider new motions based on this evidence, and all officers involved will be subject to independent investigation." The jury was dismissed for recess. The gallery emptied slowly, buzzing with outrage. Asia closed her notebook, lips pressed into a line. She leaned over to Dorian. "This goes live today, front page, all of it." Dorian nodded. "You're damn right it does." But just as the courtroom emptied, a sudden commotion at the defense table drew eyes. Officer Nathan Blake, face flushed, hands trembling, stood abruptly. His gaze darted around the room like he was cornered. And then he bolted. Out the courtroom door. Down the hallway. Gone. Security moved slowly at first, unsure. But Dorian and Jamira locked eyes and understood. "Someone warned him," Dorian whispered. Because the next part of the recording, the part they hadn't played in court, mentioned more. Names. Higher ranks. A supervisor. A captain. And Blake running meant only one thing. He wasn't just guilty. He was protecting someone worse. Outside, Blake climbed into a black SUV. The driver didn't speak, but from the passenger seat, a familiar voice said, "They were never supposed to play the tape. We've got cleanup to do." Then the doors locked from the inside. The press conference was held inside a bare municipal room on the 6th floor of the police headquarters, once a symbol of authority, now reduced to damage control. The walls were blank save for the department's emblem behind the podium, a polished badge flanked by the words integrity, honor, community. Under that banner stood Police Commissioner Grant Ellison, face taut, jaw locked, his eyes flickering with the knowledge that history had arrived without his permission. In front of him sat a swarm of reporters, microphones angled like weapons. The city wanted answers. The people demanded blood. He took a slow breath, then stepped to the podium. "Effective immediately," he began, An internal affairs investigation has been launched into all officers named in the recently released recording presented in the case of Ms. Jamira Holton. Murmurs erupted. Cameras clicked. We are cooperating with external federal review and will be placing several individuals on administrative leave pending further inquiry. Let me be clear, this department does not tolerate racial bias, false reporting, or abuse of power. But even as he said it, the cracks beneath his feet widened. Because this was not about one tape. It was about a culture. One that had been allowed to grow in silence. And now, under scrutiny, it began to eat itself. Back inside the precinct, the locker room, the unofficial heartbeat of the department was eerily quiet. The usual jokes were gone, so was the swagger. Officers sat with their heads down, glancing sideways, waiting for shoes to drop. The first was Officer Rudd, pulled from desk duty mid-shift. He didn't resist, he didn't speak. But as they walked him out, he turned to Officer Morales and said, "If I'm going down, I'm not going alone." That same day, an internal memo leaked. It contained a list of 23 previous arrests linked to Officer Blake, cases with strikingly similar language in the reports. Aggressive subject, reached into console, appeared hostile. All of them involved black residents. 13 of the cases had been dismissed. None had prompted investigation until now. And now those cases were being reopened. Officers who had once joked freely in hallways now huddled in corners, whispering like fugitives. Morales turned over his badge 2 days later. Said it was a conscience thing. Said he had watched too long. Miles, still working quietly from inside the clerk's office, began funneling documentation to Dorian and Asia. Every false timestamp, every doctored report, every quietly closed complaint. It was a flood now, not a leak. Within a week, the city's Office of Police Accountability released a preliminary report. The findings were brutal. A pattern of racially motivated stops. Evidence of coordinated falsification across 6 precincts. At least 3 supervisors aware of misconduct who failed to report. The public response was seismic. Protests flared, peaceful but roaring. Crowds surrounded the precinct. Signs read, "Recordings don't lie." Others, "Who protects us from them?" On local news, survivors of past abuse came forward. Men, women, students, seniors. One elderly woman described being pulled from her car in front of her church. Another recalled her 14-year-old son being cuffed for walking home in a hoodie. Each story was its own indictment, but together they painted something undeniable. Racism hadn't infected the department. It had designed it. The city scrambled. Emails surfaced showing Commissioner Ellison had been warned 2 years earlier about biased trends in precinct performance reports and had dismissed them as outliers. Now even he was under investigation. And through it all, Jamira Holton remained silent in public. Not from fear, but strategy. She knew they expected her to rage, to burn. Instead, she built, with Miles and Asia, she began forming a timeline of names, ranks, and decisions, a living document of collusion and decay. In private, she spoke at community gatherings, not with bitterness, but precision. "They don't collapse because of us," she said. "They collapse because the truth can't hold their weight anymore." Then came the moment. The arrest. Nathan Blake had been missing for nearly 10 days. No contact, no phone logs. But someone finally tipped off a local station, told them where he was hiding. A suburban townhouse on the edge of Warren, registered under a cousin's name. The cameras arrived first. Then came the squad cars. Then the handcuffs. Love on television. Officer Nathan Blake, once proud, once smug, was walked down a short set of steps with the world watching. Reporters shouted questions. He said nothing, just stared ahead, face blank, as if the collapse of his world hadn't hit him yet. But behind the stoic mask, he knew. This wasn't about the recording anymore. It was about everything it had unlocked. Inside the precinct, watching the arrest unfold on a mounted TV, Sergeant Whitaker crushed a paper cup in his hand. He turned to Officer Wallace, voice barely above a whisper. "We underestimated her." Wallace didn't answer, because he knew it was true. As Blake was loaded into the cruiser, his phone still in his jacket buzzed once. A new text from an unknown number. It read, "They're coming for you next. Don't say my name." They gathered at dawn, not just to protest, but to bear witness. Mothers pushing strollers, grandfathers in folding chairs, college students holding handmade signs, ministers in long coats and young girls with fists raised. By the hundreds, then the thousands, they moved toward the heart of the city with quiet, searing determination. The air carried the hum of unrest, measured, resolute, loud without shouting. Jamira Holton stood at the edge of the crowd, partially obscured beneath a hoodie. She hadn't come to lead. She came to see, to feel what her voice had stirred loose. A young boy beside her clutched a cardboard sign. If she didn't record, they wouldn't believe her. That line hit Jamira harder than any headline. This wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. At the city's main plaza, voices began to echo. Clergy, teachers, retired officers who had left the force in quiet protest years before. Each stepped forward, not with speeches, but with truth. I was pulled over 17 times in 1 year for driving my kids to school. They asked if I really owned my house. My son's college fund went to his legal fees. No rage, just testimony. Each word landed like thunder in a storm of quiet. Then the chants started. Record the power. Protect the truth.
We believe Jamira. We believe us.
By mid-morning, every major media outlet had a camera stationed nearby. CNN, MSNBC, even international reporters from Al Jazeera and BBC, drawn by the viral spread of Asia Latimore's published story, were present. The headline had struck a nerve across the nation. The taped truth, how a black woman's arrest unraveled a city. The footage of Blake's arrest looped on cable news. The audio had been analyzed, reprinted, captioned, dissected. Every name mentioned now stood under a microscope. Every past complaint re-examined. What had started as a community's cry became a national mirror. In Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlanta, D.C., rallies began to form. Hashtags trended. We hear Jamira, system on trial, recording justice. In Detroit, the mayor released a carefully worded statement about accountability and healing. The chief of police announced expanded reforms, but the crowd didn't want promises. They wanted reckoning. A student activist took the mic, her voice cracked with passion. She didn't scream, she recorded. She didn't fight, she proved, and they still tried to erase her. Then she pointed toward City Hall. And now, we record you. The crowd roared, not with violence, but purpose. That afternoon, Jamira stood beside Dorian, Asia, and Miles as they entered the municipal building. Inside, a meeting with civil rights groups, legal observers, and city officials had been scheduled after public pressure made ignoring them impossible. Jamira didn't speak first. Miles did. He laid out the evidence trail, the patterns of falsified reports, the memos buried in bureaucratic fog, every whisper turned into a document, every guess now a citation. Then Asia stood and played the final segment of audio, the one no one had heard in court. The part where a senior officer laughed and said, "We'll be fine, no one believes black women in court." Silence followed. Until a young councilwoman, eyes wide with disgust, leaned into her mic. "Get the Department of Justice on the phone." And then the twist. Congresswoman Lorraine Weaver, a black legislator known for her sharp tongue and legislative muscle, posted a tweet as the meeting ended. It read, "If Detroit PD can hide years of systemic racism this easily, how many more are buried under silence? I'm calling for a full federal investigation into this department and the culture that made it possible." It exploded. Retweets, comments. Donations to civil rights groups skyrocketed. National organizations joined the call. Petitions flooded inboxes. Celebrities reposted. Former officers came forward. And still Jamira said nothing. She simply walked out of the building and stepped into the crowd, blending into the bodies that now carried her voice like a banner. Miles turned to her. "You realize what's happening, right?" She nodded. "They cracked. But not because of me." He tilted his head. "Then why?" She looked out at the people, the press, the signs, because the truth had too many echoes. That evening, as Jamira prepared to go home, a security official intercepted her. "You're needed at the courthouse," he said, eyes tense. "They found something. In the internal emails. It's bigger than we thought." The file that changed everything wasn't flashy. No dramatic headline. No confessional from a rogue officer. Just a string of internal emails. Dry, coded, and chilling. Jamira read them in silence inside a small office at the courthouse. The walls lined with file boxes and legal briefs. Subject line, Optics Management, DS-003 Strategy. DS-003. That was her designation. A number given to a human. The thread spanned nearly 16 months long before her arrest. It detailed how non-compliant narratives were flagged, tracked, and occasionally disrupted when they presented a threat to police credibility. Her name appeared 4 times. Not just as a defendant, but as a potential influencer. This was surveillance, Jamira said aloud, her voice hollow. This wasn't a mistake. They were watching. Dorian sat across from her, jaw tight. They weren't just watching. They were planning around your silence. And when they didn't get it, they panicked. The revelation shifted the case entirely. What had been about an unjust arrest evolved into a deeper war, targeted intimidation, civil rights violations, abuse of government power. A federal investigation was formally launched within days of the disclosure. Within 3 weeks, the civil suit Jamira filed against the Detroit Police Department gained national attention. Harper and Lattimore framed it not as a personal injury claim, but as a class action trigger, a legal torch others could carry. Jamira stood in court once more, but this time on the plaintiff's side. She didn't testify in rage. She spoke with layered clarity. She described the cuffs, the eyes that refused to see her, the silence that greeted her complaint, and the calculated way her voice had been catalogued, numbered, reduced. The cost of justice, she said, is paid by those who never asked to carry its burden. The courtroom went still. The city settled. It was the largest individual civil payout for a wrongful arrest in state history, $8.3 million. But Jamira didn't take all of it. She redirected nearly half into a new fund, the Holton Foundation, dedicated to legal training for underrepresented youth, civil rights documentation, and mental health resources for survivors of systemic harm. Still, the wounds didn't close with checks and headlines. Protests continued. The community demanded structural reform, not just financial apologies. The city promised a new bias review task force, promised new training, oversight, promised change. But promises don't erase trauma. One morning, while preparing for a foundation board meeting, Jamira received a letter in the mail. It had no return address. Inside was a simple note: how many others got recorded. Attached was a flash drive. It contained an old, grainy audio clip, recorded 6 years prior. A traffic stop, a woman crying, a voice saying, "Don't worry, these things get buried." It wasn't Jamira's voice. It wasn't even Detroit, but it was the same script. And it confirmed the truth she had come to understand deeply. This wasn't just her fight. It never had been. Asia continued publishing. Miles now worked for a federal watchdog agency in Washington, quietly helping to build a repository of buried cases. And Jamira, for all the change she ignited, still bore the weight of survival. One night, she sat alone in her apartment, staring at the ceiling, the lights off, the city outside breathing like it had grown new lungs. She whispered aloud, to no one, "Is this what justice feels like? This tired?" A few days later, Dorian called with news. "They're introducing a bill named after you." She didn't reply right away. "Holton's law," he continued, "mandates independent digital review for all arrests involving force or racial disparity, first of its kind." She swallowed hard. "That won't save the next girl. Not all the time." "No," Dorian said. "But maybe it makes her scream mean something." Then, an invitation arrived. A local middle school wanted her to speak. They were studying modern civil rights movements, and the students had read about her case. They had written essays. One wrote a poem called Silence Records too. Jamira agreed. Not for applause, not for headlines, but because the war wasn't won. And someone needed to teach the next line of defense how to keep marching. She arrived at the school that afternoon, in a plain blouse, hair pinned back, nerves hidden beneath practiced breath. The auditorium was small, warm. The front row filled with young black girls who looked at her not like a hero, but like someone who had made it through. The principal introduced her. She stepped up to the podium slowly,
Paused.
then said, "When I was your age, I thought justice came from loud voices and bigger crowds. But now I know it comes from small devices, from documents, from standing still when they tell you to kneel." She scanned the crowd. "They called me a liar before they knew my name. But now my name is on your lips, not because I shouted, but because I recorded." The room held its breath. And then something shifted. A door in the back creaked open. Someone stepped in, unannounced. Eyes darted, teachers stiffened. But the man didn't speak. He stood quietly against the wall. An agent from the Department of Justice, there to tell her what had just been uncovered in another state. A mirror image. Another woman. Another number. As Jamira stepped off the stage, the agent approached her and whispered, "We need your help. What happened here? It's happening again. And this time it's buried deeper." The recording that once lived quietly in a cracked cell phone now lived everywhere. In classrooms, in legal briefings, in courtrooms, in the consciousness of a country that could no longer pretend not to hear. What began as a defense mechanism, a quiet act of self-preservation, had evolved into an archive of truth, and it was far from finished. Jamira Holton's voice, once mocked and dismissed, now echoed through halls of power. Her audio file became a teaching tool in civil rights law courses. It was cited in multiple federal complaints, referenced in over a dozen new lawsuits, each one filed by people who, like her, had once been silenced under the weight of a uniform and a lie. It wasn't the sound quality that made the recording unforgettable. It was the tone. The undeniable humanity in her voice, the haunting cruelty in theirs, the proof not just of misconduct, but of the system's choreography. Judges played it in court. Juries wept to it. A senator played a portion on the floor of Congress while arguing for broader oversight of local police departments. And in the background of it all, a generation was watching. In cities across the country, new activists rose, not with bullhorns alone, but with spreadsheets, code, and cameras. Young Black organizers began building digital resistance libraries, cross-referencing arrests with precincts, uploading dashcam anomalies, organizing training on legal documentation. One group, founded by a Howard graduate named Mikkel, called themselves the Fifth Witness. Their motto, "We don't speak for victims, we speak with proof." Mikkel credited Jamira openly. She taught us that power listens only when truth is undeniable. Meanwhile, Jamira declined most interviews, not because she didn't have more to say, but because she knew when a story became a symbol, its details got edited for comfort. "I want people to hear me," she told Asia one evening over tea, "but not rewrite me." She focused on the Holton Foundation, training youth in data integrity and legal literacy. She hosted small workshops in community libraries, teaching teenagers how to safely record interactions, how to archive, how to report without being erased. She never called herself an activist. She preferred archivist of survival. Each workshop began the same way. Jamira would play the recording, not for shock, but for memory. Then she'd ask, what didn't they want the world to hear? And hands would rise. Young hands, eager, trembling, certain. They didn't want us to hear her calm. They didn't want us to hear how normal the abuse sounded to them. They didn't want us to believe her silence was strategic. Exactly. And when the DOJ agent returned 2 months after her school speech, bringing files from another state, another woman labeled as a non-compliant entity, Jamira didn't hesitate. She consulted. She listened. And then she gave them a copy of her blueprint. What had once been self-defense had become instruction. The mic they ignored had become the weapon they couldn't silence. But with impact came resistance. A conservative news outlet ran a piece titled "The Dangerous Precedent of Holton Justice." It called her story emotionally manipulative, said her case emboldened anti-police sentiment. Jamira read the article once, then deleted it. She told her students, if your truth makes them uncomfortable, you're documenting correctly. Still, some nights brought the weight back. One evening, she sat alone in her apartment, playing the audio not to relive but to remind. She paused the tape right after Blake's voice said, "She's lying, they always do." Then she whispered to herself, "Not this time." There were now over 24 active investigations across the country tied to the structure her case had exposed. Internal systems that categorized voices, altered reports, destroyed credibility on paper. Her case was no longer the centerpiece. It was the crack in the glass. And yet Jamira never claimed victory, because victory suggested finality. And she knew better. The struggle was not an event, it was a rhythm. Some days it hummed. Some days it screamed, but it never stopped. And she wouldn't either. They tried to erase her by ignoring her voice, but they forgot the mic was still on. And now every word she captured lives in echo. The tape didn't just prove her innocence. It proved the system's comfort with guilt. And long after the officers resigned, long after the lawsuits settled, long after the headlines faded, her recording plays on. In earbuds, in courtrooms, in hearts, a reminder that silence never wins. Not when the truth is louder. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes to the power of truth and the weight of unheard voices, then don't let it stop here. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that expose injustice, honor resilience, and give voice to the silenced. Because silence doesn't just happen, it's allowed. And together, we can make sure it never wins again.